As much as some apps love to say it, there is no such thing as an all-in-one application. We have a digital toolkit, action management apps, communication apps, library-based apps, browser extensions, note-taking apps, apps for health, and loads of little subcategories inside all of those that have other applications specific to certain niche use cases. But there are some apps that I use on a daily basis that help me avoid most of life's stresses. The clock on my phone isn't anything special, but having a stopwatch and a timer is very useful when you're in the gym or when you need to count something, obviously. And I don't use the alarm clock, but it is always set for 9 a.m, so I do have that failsafe just in case I ever do sleep in, which doesn't actually happen anymore. Once I'm up and out of bed, the first app that I look to is Todoist, because that is my task management application of choice. I use the Todoist widget on my phone and it is synced with Google Calendar. So I have my tasks synced to my calendar and I have my events synced to my tasks. So it doesn't matter which one I look at, because I have both applications on my phone in widget forms, I can see my day in lots of different ways. I am on a free plan in Todoist, which gives me 5 projects and it gives me a maximum of 50 tasks per project. Now, I've never actually reached the limit of tasks in a project. I've got close, but I've never actually reached the limit. And you'll be able to see that the 5 projects I have in my Todoist actually sync up directly with the 5 calendars I have in my Google Calendar. I also have more calendars in my Google Calendar, but I don't really use them that much. They're there mainly for viewing purposes. Now, my action project is split up into sections: daily section, repeated section, and medication, so I can find them obviously and change them, daily and repeated again, so it just becomes easier to find actions and tasks when I do want to make a change to them. The YouTube project has a task in there that's set up as a project, so whenever I have a new YouTube video, I can just duplicate the task and then just add the name. The time project is pretty simple and self-explanatory, and then the other project has a couple of sections, but it is mainly for miscellaneous tasks and my read later list. Now, the reason I have the articles on my read later list in Todoist is because it now turns them into actions. They are tasks, which means I need to do them at some point. It's not on a list, a maybe read later list that no one ever really looks at and sort of just forgets about. It's in my task management system, which means the article becomes something I want to do instead of it becoming something I do in that elusive spare time that we supposedly have. Now, I've mentioned Google Calendar, but it's more of a syncing information together app than actually viewing app. And if anyone does want to book a meeting with me, they can. I have my Calendly link, free Calendly link on my website so people can book a meeting. And because it's synced through Google Calendar, it appears in my Todoist task list. But when I actually want to view what I'm doing in a day, my daily schedule, my actions, or anything like that on my PC, I use an application called Morgan. Now, Morgan is a desktop-based application, and it allows you to put basically any account in there, any calendar account in there. So I have 3 different Gmail accounts onto my Morgan account, and I can see all of the different calendars on the same calendar view. So let me say that again. I have 3 different Google Calendar accounts in my Morgan, and I can see all of the calendars from all of the accounts in the same view. And this works on Linux and on Mac. It's a very nice application. I also use Morgan for scheduling meetings, so I can just send them some times that I'm available. I can send them a link for them to book a time for certain meetings, or I could set up a recurring link, very similar to Calendly, but it's already in my calendar application, and I can see whatever calendar I want at the time, and I can just click and drag through, very similar to other applications like SavvyCal, Fantastical, etc. There is a global shortcut which I use every day, all the time, which allows me to pop up either the day view, the month view, the week view, and all of the hotkeys that you would expect to be in there from Google are there. So D for day, W for week, etc., T for today. So I can click the global hotkey, bring up my day. I can then click an arrow key, which you can't do in Google Calendar. I don't understand it, but you can click the arrow key to go to the next day, or W, and then next week, and you can see things in this pop-up, and then just global hotkey and close it down again. And something else that is so useful, which I don't understand why you can't do in Google Calendar, but you can drag an all-day task from the top, from the all-day task, into the actual day. It's a very small thing, but instead of having to go into the all-day task, then click on the time, then come out of it, I can just click and drag it down. So if I want to add a task, I can can use the global hotkey for a Todoist on my keyboard, add the task in for an all-day task. I then decide, you know what, I'm going to do that later on in the day, and instead of having to go to Todoist or change it, or Google Calendar to change it, I can just quickly global hotkey, bring up Morgan, drag it down into the day, and then spread it out up and down. I don't have to drag the event or the task up and then drag it down like you do in Google Calendar. I can drag it up and down. So many small things that are very, very nice. Another feature I use quite a lot is what I'm going to call workspaces. Essentially, you can set up hotkeys, so number hotkeys, for certain views. So if I want to see my actions and events, I can set that to one hotkey. If I want to see what my sister and my mum are doing, I can set that to another hotkey. And there are 10 different hotkeys, and you can have multiple workspaces for your calendar views, so I can go through things all over the place, and it just makes things very, very easy and convenient to see what is going on and plan things appropriately. The communication apps I use are mainly Gmail, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp, Discord, and ConvertKit. Nothing really groundbreaking or surprising in there. My Gmail inbox is emptied every single morning without fail, but I don't actually look at it after that. So once I've checked my emails for the day, I don't look at it again unless there is an email that I really, really need to look at, but most of the time that's on my phone. And how I get through most of my emails very quickly is using Speechify. So I will click onto the top email. I will then use the shortcut to activate Speechify. That will then speed read through the email, and if there are any notes I want to take on either the newsletter or an article or anything like that, if there's any notes I want to grab, I want to have my Obsidian up on my second screen and take those notes appropriately. If there are any articles in the email, I'll quickly open up the article and just save it to Todoist so I can look at it later, which will actually happen later on in the day. When I do take notes on newsletters or blogs or things like that, I make sure, if I can, I copy the link address to where it is online rather than emails. That way when I'm reviewing it later on, I go back to the actual website rather than into my emails. I go through my Twitter bookmarks at the beginning of every day, very similar to my emails. I will go through them, take notes in Obsidian, any articles go into my Todoist, any other notes, I just copy the link and it goes into my Obsidian note. And then there is Spotify. Now I use Spotify for basically all of my music, and I use Spotify for my podcasts-ish. Basically any podcast that isn't on YouTube, I listen to through Spotify. Now I do check Spotify every morning for any new podcast episodes that come up. I will have a quick read of the description, and if it's interesting, I'll add it to my listen later list. YouTube is a little different because I have the notification set up on my phone. So any notification that comes up on my phone, if it's interesting, watch later list. Just watch later list. Now, I don't read books or listen to books, so I don't have a book library of any sort. I have what Anne-Laurie calls an anti-library. It's a term she used, and I'm going to borrow/steal it, but it's an anti-library. It's a library of books that I haven't read, but I know about. So my anti-library is a folder in my Obsidian, which has loads and loads of books that have either been referenced in videos or podcasts, but most of the time, the books in there, I've listened to the author talk about the book in a podcast or in multiple podcasts, and I actually think that's kind of better than reading the book in some ways, because I can get the author's opinion over a period of time about this book, and sometimes I hear the same point brought up in a book multiple different times from different perspectives, with different stories that weren't mentioned in the book because they're talking about it rather than having that condensed version. And then when I hear a video, I'm like, oh, I remember the author saying this in that podcast, and all of those notes are in my system. So as mentioned, my personal note-taking tool is Obsidian, but when I'm working with other people or collaborating with a team, I use Notion because Notion is just better for team and collaboration work when it comes to note-taking, wiki management, and action management to an extent with other people. My main research tools, as you could probably expect, are social media tools, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube obviously, Spotify, and any place you can find articles or blogs. But I also use Google Scholar to find academic research, and then I use ResearchGate sometimes to either get access to the article or to look at some of the researchers that are active in that field and then try and reach out to them and have a conversation with them, a lot of the time through email, which isn't ideal, but I use ResearchGate to try and contact some of the researchers in the areas that I'm interested in. ResearchRabbit is a tool that I'm very intrigued to explore, but I currently don't have access, so I can't speak too much on that yet. For PDF articles, typically academic articles, I use Adobe Acrobat, which is a free application, to basically put highlights on. When I have the PDF in my Obsidian Vault, I then just look at the highlights, put the notes into my Obsidian as a capture note, and then it stays there. Data storage, almost everything I have is on Google, so Google Email, Google Calendar, Google Drive, so I have my cloud storage in Google, and even though Obsidian does have Obsidian Sync, which is technically a cloud sync thing-ish, I mainly use the multiple local storage versions I have of Obsidian, and then I do have it backed up in Google Drive as well. The skill-based applications that I use Filmora for my editing. I use Audacity for my audio editing. I use Visual Studio Code for any code editing that I'm going to be doing, which is mainly CSS Obsidian themes. I use WordPress for my website, and then, because obviously you need hosting, I use Bluehost for that. I then use StreamYard for any streaming I'm going to do, or any collaborative calls that I'm going to do for potentially the podcast. And then I use Affinity Photo for any image editing that I'm going to be doing. Business tools, I use TubeBuddy, and any YouTuber that doesn't know about TubeBuddy should certainly explore it. It's going to save you a lot of time with bulk actions. It gives you a lot of information with SEO research, keyword research, thumbnail research, and loads of other stuff. vidIQ is another tool that is very similar. I personally prefer TubeBuddy over vidIQ, but I do use vidIQ for one specific feature. It is the toolbar. So when I go into YouTube, I get a rough idea of what's going on my channel without having to go into Studio, which is very nice because going in and out of Studio isn't fun. And if you're a YouTube creator, you'll know that pain. I use Zoom as my video platform linked with Calendly because it's the easiest one to link up. Google Meets I use Microsoft Teams as well, and I have used Skype as well, so there's no real limit there. Google Trends is another app, I think. You can class it as an app that I use quite a lot, it's great fun because when you go in, you can see the different trends, the different search trends on Google, on YouTube for different apps, different tools, area of research, and popular trends that's going on right now in the world. I use Gumroad to host all of my templates and things like that, and then I use Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon as well for any other support people want to put my way, and they are linked with PayPal and Stripe. It would be great to hear what's in your digital toolkit down below so I can do a bit of comparison, because I'm curious to see what other tools I may be missing or other tools you're using instead of the tools that I'm using. But until then, get off YouTube and do something productive with your time instead.